In Luke chapter 7, the Lord gives us a really good example of what true humility looks like. And starting in verse 36, then one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him. And he went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil and stood at his feet behind him weeping. And she began to wash his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with the fragrant oil. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, this man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what manner of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answered and said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. So he said, Teacher, say it. There was a certain creditor who had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. And when they had nothing with which to repay, he freely forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him more? Simon answered and said, I suppose the one whom he forgave more. And he said to him, You have rightly judged. Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, Do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head. You gave me no kiss, but this woman has not ceased to kiss my feet since the time I came in. You did not anoint my head with oil, but this woman has anointed my feet with fragrant oil. Therefore, I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. Then he said to her, Your sins are forgiven. And those who sat at the table with him began to say to themselves, Who is this who even forgives sins? Then he said to the woman, Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. And to look at this from three different views, first you have the Pharisees. It wasn't just Simon. There were other Pharisees there eating in his house. And, they were devoted to the law, but they didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And, they loved to hold everybody to the strictness of the law, but Jesus came to fulfill the law, because you can't keep the law in yourself. They love to point out other people's sins, and judge other people's lives. But the issue is hearing they didn't hear and seeing they didn't see. Jesus was right there in front of them, and they didn't believe that that's who he was. The sinner, this woman who had many sins, whatever they may have been, and yet she believed that he was the Messiah, that he was Jesus, and that he could forgive her sins. And she humbly came to him and washed his feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. And, it took a lot of humility to humble yourself, to wash his feet. And it took boldness, because during that culture, she knew that the Pharisees were going to judge her. And right in front of her, they put her on trial in front of the Lord, as though they were hoping that he would condemn her. And, he's pointing out to them, look, her faith is what is drawn her to me. And yet you can't see it because you're so caught up in the law and keeping the rules and being self-righteous and religious. But yet this woman has true humility. And then we see God's response to her. And he's telling her, your sins are forgiven you. And the compassion and the gentleness and the kindness that he was showing her is almost palpable. And, he was her defense. He didn't condone her sins, whatever they were, but he could forgive her sins. And he wasn't focused on that, on her sinful state, even though he forgave her. It was more about the humility and the faith that she had shown him. And, it was a reflection of her heart before God. And, this is a good lesson for us that, if we humble ourselves before God under his almighty hand, that he will lift you up. Be bold for his name's sake. Doesn't matter how people view you or what they see your life to be. We live for an audience of one.